right, let's go ahead and close out this PowerPoint though, and we'll get out of here. And I will show you my screen here, and you should see the dashboard for my test account. If there's any issues with the screen or if you're not able to see it on your end, please feel free to let me know. But everything should be good to go on that end. Now, from here though, let's go ahead and navigate to the accounting section, and we'll talk about some of these enhancements. Now, the first thing that we're going to talk about is going to have to do with vendor setup within the system. There's going to be a couple new fields that you'll see when you're going through that process that weren't there previously. Now, to see these, let's click on this Add Vendor button here on the left-hand side. And from there, let's take a look at some of these fields. Now, you'll notice that a lot of these fields here are going to be the same. The ones that have changed are going to have to do with a couple different settings here in this section. Now, previously, you've probably seen this setting already within the vendor profile, but we have a setting that is labeled consolidated. That is going to be renamed to pay on same check. So that's going to come into play when you're processing payments within the AP module here within Entrata. When you go to process payments and we have invoices for more than one invoice for the same vendor, we'll go ahead and just put them on one check if that setting is enabled. So that setting has been renamed. We're also going to have additional settings here related to service location and the service provided. Now, that's going to allow you to select between an on-site or a vendor that performs work on-site at the property or one that works remotely. And then you'll also be able to select a service category for that vendor. And these are going to come into play a little bit later on when we talk about the compliance tab within Entrata, and we take a look at setting up compliance rule sets. So we'll be able to add some detail to those rule sets, and we'll be able to select to apply the rule set to specific vendors, whether they perform work on site or remotely, or if you want to apply it to a specific service category, maybe it's a contractor or things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a couple more minutes. Now, once we have the actual vendor profile created, there's going to be some changes that we'll need to be aware of within the actual vendor profile. So let's open up one of these existing vendors and we'll take a look at some of those changes. First thing within the vendor profile, what's changed is this vendor info tab is currently called corporate, but that will change as of Thursday. You'll see that change to vendor info. And within this section, we'll be able to do a couple different things. Now, you'll notice, and most importantly, down here about halfway down, we're going to have a list now for legal entities. Now, in the past, or as of today, if you're on the standard track, you're able to add locations, but they all fall under the vendor profile, this corporate vendor name up at the top. So they all fall under the same umbrella. But a lot of these vendors that you work with probably don't necessarily all fall under, a corporate entity. They might be a franchisee, so we would need to keep track of that information separately. And with this update, you'll be able to do so, allowing you to pull reporting later on by legal entity when it comes to generating 1099s and reviewing that information. Now, to add a legal entity, what we can do is I can come down to this section here and add a legal entity on the right-hand side. It's going to ask me for a name here, so I'll just go ahead and enter in a test name for this example. We can go ahead and add an employer identification number. I can add the entity type here as well, and we'll select if we're going to be generating a 1099 for this specific entity. Now I'll select my 1099 type and then a box number here. Go ahead and select one of these. And we can bring over a previous 1099 balance if we're carrying that over from a previous system as well, if we need to add that when we create this profile. Now I'll go ahead and click add, and it'll add it to my legal entity section. And when we go ahead and add a location, we'll now be able to tie that location to that specific legal entity, and we'll be able to associate multiple locations under that one legal entity umbrella here now within the vendor profile. So let's take a look at that. Let's actually come back up to the top and let's add a location, and we'll see where this comes into play now that we've set it up. So I can come up here and click on this locations tab, and within the location section, we'll now be able to add a new location. I can add that location name. We'll go ahead and call this here by the city that it's located in. I can add an address for that location, and I can come in and start filling in these required fields. Now, most importantly though, in this legal entity dropdown, I'll now be able to click on that dropdown and select the legal entity that this location is going to fall under. So we'll select that new LLC that we just set up. We can select a remittance type, and then we're going to approve this vendor or enable it for all of the properties here within Entrata. Now, if you come down here to the bottom, you're going to see the ability to add account number information. This is existing functionality. The only thing that we've added to this is that within this account section, we now have the ability to add or use sub-account numbers if they apply to that specific vendor. Now, once we have that location tied to that legal entity, I can go ahead and click add. We'll be able to see the location name, the legal entity it's tied to, and then the properties that that specific location is approved for. At this point in time, once we start processing payments, creating invoices, processing payments in the system, we'll be able to come into the report section and pull reporting by each specific legal entity and see what we've paid out individually throughout the year. So again, we would have to set up the legal entity and then add the location. When we add the location, we'll be able to associate it at that point in time. Now, within the vendor profile, one of the other big changes that you'll see in this section is going to be under this compliance tab. We currently have an insurance section where you're able to update insurance policy info, attach a document, things like that. But with this compliance tab, we're going to be allowing you to create specific rule sets, is what we call them, that drive this compliance section. You're going to be able to start setting up some requirements for these vendors where we're going to be able to require specific document types. We can require insurance information, things like that. And that's going to tie in later on down the road to what we're calling vendor access. And vendor access is going to be a portal where these vendors can update this information themselves. They'll be able to upload all of the info, and then they'll be able to upload invoices into the system. They'll receive POs from you, things like that. So that's going to be coming a little bit later on down the road. For now, the compliance section will be a standalone tab within the vendor profile where we'll be able to set up these rule sets. Now, you'll notice for this vendor that we're looking at, I have the compliance tab opened up, and I have all of these properties that don't have any specific rule sets assigned. So as of this point, there's no specific requirement for this vendor. What we need to do is we actually need to set up these rule sets. So to do so, I'm going to open up a duplicate tab, and I'm going to head over to the setup and company section. Within this section, we'll navigate over to the financial tab, and under financial, we'll open up the vendor section. Now, that's going to open up this compliance tab for you, and you'll be able to see any rule sets that are currently set up for the management company. I can come over to the add compliance rule set section, and we'll be able to start creating these requirements or setting the requirements for these vendors. Now, I'm going to call this here, I'll just call this my vendor requirements. We'll say something like minimum liability. And then we'll be able to start selecting who to apply this rule set to. Now, if you remember, when we were creating the vendor, we were able to select if that vendor worked remotely or if they perform work on site. We can select that here in the applies to section. I can also limit the services provided, so I can select a specific service category. Again, that was one of the things that we were able to select when we were creating the vendor profile. And then if I want to go into even more detail, I'll be able to come in and limit or apply this rule set to specific vendors. So I can go as detailed as I want there. I can go by service category, things like that. But I can even just select the specific vendors to apply it to. And then we'll be able to select the properties that this is going to apply to. So I can come in here and select individual properties. I can select all of the properties if I like to. Now, before I create this rule set, let me take a look really quick at this vendor. Okay, so it's on site. So we'll go ahead and select, apply that to vendors that perform work on site. I won't limit it by service category or vendor at this point in time. I'm now going to come down to the bottom and we'll be able to start setting some of those requirements up. So I'll set up document requirements here. I'll click on add document and we'll now be able to select the type of document that it is that we want to require. So I'll select a document type here and you'll notice we'll have a couple different options. We'll be able to select from a W-9, maybe that's we were requesting a copy of that in order to process these payables. We can request maybe a copy of the business license or some other miscellaneous document. So I'll select my type and I'll just name this requirement. I'll come down to the insurance section and I'll now be able to add the insurance requirements as well as part of this rule set. So we'll click on add insurance. We can select a specific type from this dropdown. So I can select if I want to require liability insurance, maybe workers' compensation or some other miscellaneous insurance here. We'll go ahead and select liability. We'll go ahead and add a name here. And then we'll set the required amount for that specific requirement for that vendor. So we'll say we're going to require $100,000 in liability insurance. We're going to validate the expiration date so that we're always checking to make sure that that policy has not expired. If it is, we won't be able to process payables. And then we'll come down here to the status allowances. Now, I did have a question come up just now, and the question is, are service provider categories added by Entrata? And the answer to that is yes. There's a default list that we have provided. At this point in time, you're not able to add any additional categories, Fanny, so it is a preset list. Now, within this status allowances section, we'll be able to denote how far in the payables process somebody is going to be able to get if they are incomplete, if they haven't met the requirements. This pending column is going to come into play a little bit later on when we release the vendor access functionality, so you can disregard this column for now. The other column that we do want to maybe set up is going to be this non-compliant section. So if I want to allow purchase order creation when the compliance status is incomplete, I can allow my users to create POs or create invoices for that vendor. If that vendor was compliant and at some point they are no longer compliant, maybe the insurance expires, things like that, I can also allow my users to create purchase orders, invoices, or process payments for them if I'd like to. So we give you the flexibility to come in here and allow your users to continue in the process with these vendors as far as you like. So just keep that in mind when you're setting up these compliance rule sets. Now, we'll go ahead and create that rule set here and we'll click save. Now that I've done so, I can head over to my accounting section, back into that vendor profile. And if I open up the compliance tab, we should now see the requirements that I've set in that rule set, which applied to this specific vendor. We're now going to require the document upload and the insurance upload as well. So I can open up this hyperlink here, and the system is going to ask me to upload policy information. I can add a new policy. We'll enter in a policy number. Go ahead and add that in the right field here. We'll add a policy name, a policy amount, and then we'll apply this to all of the properties if all of them are going to be covered. Now we'll go ahead and upload a copy of that document proof of insurance if we like to here in this section, and then we'll select an expiration date as well. So we'll say that goes through August 31st of 2016. We'll upload the policy. When I close this window out, you'll notice now that we have a green check mark next under the insurance column, denoting that they've met that requirement. I can now come in and under the hyperlink for the document section, I can do the same. I can upload that information. We'll upload the W-9. We'll select a copy of that document here. I just have a test document I can add, and we'll upload that as well. Once we do so, you're going to see that for all of those properties, we'll now move them from the needs action section to the compliance section. And at that point in time, we're able to start processing, creating those purchase orders, creating invoices, and processing payments now that that vendor is compliant, as long as those status allowances allow it. So you have, again, the flexibility. It's kind of a two-part process. You have to create the rule set if you want to set up these requirements, and then within this compliance section, you'll be able to see the status of the vendor for each respective property. So before I navigate away from the vendor profile, are there any questions related to that specific section before I head on over to the purchase orders section? So hey, Fanny, to answer your question, yes, if you update the settings to, if you create a rule set, it is going to impact existing vendors and it will create the requirements for everybody. Alrighty, I don't see any additional questions coming in, so I'll close out that vendor profile and we'll head over to the purchase order section and we'll talk about some of the updates to that PO section. Now, under this purchase order window, we made some changes to the user interface. If we open up one of these existing purchase orders, you'll be able to see a couple changes here in this section. Now, we moved the name of the vendor to the top left here, so it's more easily visible. We also added the PO number here in the top right again, so it's more easily visible. It used to be located here within this section and was a little bit harder to see. Along the top here, you've probably seen where we have a couple different action items that were listed across the top of this this section of the PO, but that's now been consolidated under the more action section to try to clean up that area a little bit. So those buttons where you could duplicate or create an invoice from the purchase order have now been added to the more action section. But everything else is going to be generally the same. You'll notice we'll still have details in this section. We'll still show you all of the account information, things like that. The three big things to kind of be on the lookout for are going to be the vendor name, the purchase order number, and then all of the action items under that more action section. The biggest changes to this PO section are going to come when it comes to creating the purchase order itself. So let's actually click on this Add PO button and we'll take a look at this specific section. And you're going to see a couple different changes here within this section. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about first here is the type of PO that we're creating. So right now we're creating a standard purchase order where I'm able to come in and select a specific expense account or GL account from this drop down here once I have a property selected or a vendor selected. Now, the other type of PO that you'll be able to create, for those of you that use asset tracking already within Entrata, you'll be able to create a catalog PO. And that's going to allow your users, instead of having to select a specific GL account or expense account and hoping that maybe they enter in the correct information, I can set up specific items and assets within the system. And instead of selecting that GL account, I'll be able to just select from the list of those items within this dropdown. Now, this option to create a catalog PO will be available if you have asset tracking enabled and if you currently use it. So just keep that in mind. If that's not something that you currently use, this dropdown won't actually be listed here. The only type of purchase order that you'll be able to create is going to be that standard one. Now, one of the other things that changed within the purchase order creation window is going to be with this line item default section. Within the line item defaults, if we open that up, you'll be able to see a couple different options here in this section. Now, we have a couple different flags that are new. You'll notice that we're now able to assign a specific department to this, this purchase order line or each individual line item. So if I come in here, I can denote whether this purchase order or a specific line item is for maybe the maintenance team, maybe we're ordering maintenance supplies. If it's for administrative or the leasing team, if we're ordering office supplies and things like that, we'll be able to tag each individual line item here within the purchase order, and that's going to allow us to pull reporting later on based on those specific flags like department. Now, one of the other things that we'll be able to see in this section is we'll have the option to mark items as confidential. So if we want to hide specific transactions from certain users, we're able to do so by marking them as confidential. And doing so in this section is going to assign it to all of the line items in bulk, but I can always come back in here and mark something as no longer confidential or change the department if I want to. It doesn't matter that I set it up here in bulk to begin with. Now, this confidential flag, if that is something that we want to use and start flagging these items as, again, as confidential, what we'll need to do is we'll actually have to update the permissions for certain groups or users within Entrata so that they're able to view these transactions. Now, we can mark these transactions again all day, but what we need to do is under this setup section, I can go to the users and groups tab, and under users and groups, we'll be able to, let me open up just one of my users here. We'll be able to go to the permissions section. Let me open up, actually, I'm logged in as somebody that can't update permissions. Let me log back in here. Just a second. Okay, we're gonna head over to the cancel. We're gonna head over to the setup users and groups section, and I'm gonna open up that user that we're looking at. Now, within that profile, we'll be able to head on over to the accounting section or under the permissions tab and head over to the accounting section, and under the purchase orders tab, we'll be able to update the permission for either the user or the group as a whole, and we'll allow them to view confidential transactions on that purchase order. We can also jump over into the invoices section and do the same thing. We'll be able to give them permissions to view any confidential line items or transactions within each of these specific sections. So just keep that in mind. If we want to start using that, we'll want to make sure that we're updating the permissions under setup users and groups. Once those transactions or once those items are set as confidential, we'll be able to only allow those users to see them within the payables module. Now, you don't necessarily have to enable the confidential flag. If that is something that you don't want to enable, it's not going to be on by default, so you will have to enable it. But if you maybe somebody enables it, you're not using it, or you'd rather not use it, we can always come back into the financial and corporate section, and under the account settings here, we'll be able to disable the item confidentiality, and we'll be able to disable that department drop down as well if that's not something that we want to use. The other thing that you'll see within this line item section, apart from being able to flag items under a specific department, we'll also be able to see another dropdown that is not currently enabled in this section, but that is going to be the custom GL tag. Now, we've had a couple of clients ask for the ability to mark or flag these transactions with specific tags that they create within the system. And we're able to do that now by enabling that functionality under the setup company and financial section. So let's take a look here. Under this general ledger section, you'll be able to see the custom tags. And you'll notice that we have transaction tags here, but I don't have the custom GL tags enabled. We'll go ahead and enable the custom GL tags. And at this point, we'll also enable routing tags, which I'll talk about here in just a little bit. Now I'll save that. I'll come down just a little bit. And under the custom tag section, I'll now be able to create custom tags that I want to be able to use to tag the specific transactions within a purchase order or an invoice. Now I can create whatever tag I'd like. I can come in here. These are fully customizable. Once they're created and are marked as published, you'll be able to see the list here in this section. But more importantly, within the actual purchase order, we'll be able to see that specific option. So let me go ahead and come back in here. Just refresh that really quick. And under line item defaults, you'll now be able to see this custom tag dropdown. In that custom tag, again, whatever we create at the company level will show up here in this dropdown. We'll be able to tag specific transactions with whatever we create, again, at that company level. And we'll be able to pull reporting later on with using these specific tags. So again, they're fully customizable. They just need to be, the functionality needs to be enabled under setup company financial. And then you need to create the custom tags that you would like to use, and you'll be able to see them in this dropdown. As far as the updates though, for the purchase orders themselves, The biggest changes were going to be to the type of purchase orders that we're able to use or create. And again, that was either a standard PO or a catalog PO if you are using the inventory and asset tracking functionality within Entrata. We're also making changes to this line items default section where we'll be able to assign department tags or custom tags, as well as mark items as confidential within that section. Before we navigate away from that PO section, is there any additional questions concerning the PO? If you do, let me know. You can chat me your questions. If not, we'll go ahead and continue and talk about the invoices section. So, hey, Fanny, I saw your question come over here on my end, and the answer to your question, you're wondering if you're able to send back a PO to the creator if there are any issues. And if we use approval routing, we are able to send those items back, whether it was a PO, maybe it was an invoice, things like that. We're able to send those items back. That is existing functionality. You just have to have approval routing enabled within Entrata. Great question, though. Thank you. Alrighty, let's go ahead and close out this PO window. But let's navigate over to the invoices section. And you know what? I just saw a hand come up here. And Holly, I've gone ahead and unmuted you. You can go ahead. I think you've muted yourself as well. Go ahead, and if you unmute yourself, you can ask your question, or you can chat it to me as well if you'd like.
Unmute. Okay. My question is, when you custom tag the PO, like what's an example of a custom tag? And where does it flow through to the invoice to, like, how do you know?
So that's going to flow through to the invoice when we create, if we create the invoice from the purchase order, we'll pull that information over and we'll be able to see it within the actual line item itself. And we're also going to be able to pull reporting as far as expenses, POs, all the accounting reporting, and we'll be able to filter out by those specific transactions. Now, as far as specific examples of custom tags, one of the examples that somebody brought up in a previous session was maybe like a damages tag or things like that, or a rehab tag. You saw the one that I had in that drop down. So it just kind of depends. Where there are specific clients that had the requirement where they wanted to use those specific tags in certain cases. Not everybody's going to use them, so it's not going to be on by default. But the ability to create it is there if it is something that you'll think you'll need at a later point in time. I think. What's that?
Oh, just within an expense category, then you could use it as that instead of creating like another expense account.
Yeah, we could maybe do something like that. That's actually a pretty good idea. But it just depends on the use case for your management company.
Okay.
I think the biggest one, the biggest use, or probably the biggest benefit, is going to be not necessarily with the custom GL tags, but with the routing tags, which are kind of like the custom tags, but those I think will maybe be used a lot more. And we're going to talk about those here with the invoices in just a minute. I think once we talk about the routing tags, I think that might be more of the functionality that would be beneficial, and I think you'll see it might make a little more sense at that point in time, kind of where the benefit lies.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah, for sure.
Yep.
Alrighty, so let's go ahead and open up one of these invoices then. Let me head over to that invoices section, and let's talk about some of the updates to that invoice. Now, if I open up an existing invoice here, what we're going to see is we're going to see similar changes like we did with the purchase order. We'll be able to see the vendor name in the top left here more easily visible. We'll have a link to the vendor profile that you can click on to view the vendor record. We can make any changes within this section just like we would if we were looking at it under the vendor subtab. We can close out and come back to the invoice that we're looking at. Now in the top right, we'll be able to see the invoice number, just like we did with the PO, is just more easily visible. And then along the top, we had a couple action items in this section that have been consolidated as well under the More Actions tab. So those are the big changes to the invoice window. The biggest changes though are going to come when we're creating the invoice itself, and that's going to be here when we click on new invoice on the left hand side. And let's talk about some of these changes. Now, just like we did with the purchase order, we're also able to create a couple different types of invoices now. If you use the asset tracking functionality, if that's enabled, we'll be able to create catalog invoices now. And just like we were talking about with the purchase order, instead of having to select a specific GL account, I can come in and I can select from a list of items or services that I've created at the company level. The other type of invoice that you'll see in this section is going to be a credit memo type. And we currently allow you to add credit memos in the system, but it's not specific, it's not its own type of invoice within Entrata. So we've kind of split those out. They fall under their own category now. And just like you did previously with these credit memos, you're going to create these just the same. We'll go in there and add all the details for as far as the vendor, what vendor it's for, what property, things like that. When we create these credit memos, as far as applying the credit to any unpaid invoices, that functionality is going to be the same. It hasn't changed. You'll still see that blue ribbon across the top that lets you know how many credits you have within the system, and you'll see the hyperlink to apply the credit to an unpaid invoice. So again, that process is the same. If I go back into that invoice window though, within that section, we'll be able to see a couple other items, just like we saw with the purchase orders. The line item defaults, those are going to be the same. We'll have those department, custom GL tags, and we'll also have the confidential flag as well if we enable those in the system. So those are going to be available as well under invoices. But the biggest change though is going to be on the right-hand side under the routing tag. Now in this routing tag section, just like we did with those GL tags, we're going to be able to create custom tags, but actually tie them to the approval process so that depending on the tag that is selected in this dropdown, we're able to send that invoice for approval to a specific user or group. Now, you'll notice in this section, a couple tags that I've created as an example are priority tags. I can now tag this invoice as a low, medium, or urgent priority. And again, if I have my approval routing set up, I can send based on that priority to a different user or group. Now, just like we did with the custom GL tags, these have to be enabled, or that functionality has to be enabled. And if you remember, that's located under the Setup Company section, under Financial, General Ledger, and Custom Tags. So we enabled it here. It's set to yes. We'll come down to the bottom here and we'll look at our routing tags. And this is where we're going to create the routing tags that we want to use or appear in that dropdown. If I add a routing tag, I can, again, it's fully customizable, add whatever I want. I can publish that and it's going to be available within that dropdown. Now, there's an additional step here in that now that we've enabled the routing tags and have created them, we have to make sure that we tie it to the approval route in order for them to actually be used and take effect. So we created the tags. Now let's head over to the financial and accounts payable section. Within this section, under approval settings or under this approval section, we'll be able to come down to the route. And if I open this up, we'll be able to edit it. Now, under the route rules, let's head over to this invoices section. If I add a rule or edit an existing one, you'll be able to see the rule window that you've probably seen before if you've ever set up an approval route. But within this section, you'll notice that under my conditions, there's going to be one additional option, and that's the new functionality that's being released, and that's going to be to route the invoice based on specific routing tags. So in this dropdown, I can now select my tag, and I can say if it's a low priority, let's send that over to maybe my regional group or a specific user. If it was, we can add an additional rule and say if this was a medium priority, let's send that straight to the accounting manager. If it's an urgent priority, we'll send that even higher up. So you'll now have the flexibility to route that invoice based on whatever routing tags have been created within the system. Now, these routing tags will also be available for payments. So the routing functionality will be extended to payments as well, not just invoices, and that will be part of the March 17th release. So again, once we have all of that set up, it's kind of a two-step process. Enable it and create the tags, assign them to the approval route. When a user comes in and selects the routing tag within the invoice, it's going to go to whatever user or group we've set within the approval route itself for it to go to and actually be approved to post to the GL. So the biggest change with these invoices is going to be with that routing tag functionality. We'll go ahead and close out this invoice section and we'll take a look at the journal entry changes. So I'm going to navigate from this invoices here. We'll open up the journal entries tab and we'll talk about some of the changes there within that section. Now, under journal entries, we'll be able to see as far as the changes go. Within the user interface for the journal entry, it's going to be generally the same. You'll be able to see some of the action items here in the top right, and the color scheme changed just a little bit, but there's not a whole lot of changes when it comes to the UI. The biggest changes to these are going to be when we're creating the journal entry, just like we were talking about with POs and invoices. And that's going to happen here. Let's click on Add a Journal Entry. And it's going to be primarily with these templates or templates option that is now located in the top right. What we can do now within the system is we'll be able to create a journal entry template that will allow us to add as many presets as we'd like, so that when we're creating maybe that month-end journal entry or whatever it is that we're doing here within the system, we'll be able to select that template, apply it to the journal entry that I'm creating, and automatically preset a lot of the fields within that section or within that journal entry. Now, to create the template, we're going to have to click on Journal Entry Templates here on the left-hand side. We'll open up the template, and you'll be able to see a list of any templates that we've created here that are either manual or recurring. Just to give you a little bit of background, you've probably seen within the journal entry section recurring journal entries, or you've had the ability to create those in the past. Now that functionality will still be available to you. It's just now going to fall under this template section, and we're going to call it a recurring journal entry template. Now, if you have existing recurring journal entries, we're going to migrate those over into this section. There's no additional work that you need to do on your end in case you've already created some. Just keep in mind, though, that with this update, they're going to live under this template section now within the journal entry section. To create a new one, we're going to click on the Add button on the left-hand side. We're going to select if we're going to create the template from scratch here. I can select New Template. Or if I want to use an existing journal entry as a guideline, I can pull that journal entry in and use that for reference. I'm going to create this one brand new. I'm going to add a template name. And I can start filling in all of these fields here and start setting those presets. So I can add a reference number. I can associate this to a specific property. I can select an accounting method or GL book, add additional notes. Now, most importantly, though, on the right-hand side here, we'll be able to select the template type. So if this is going to be a manual template where I have to go in and apply it every single time, I can do that. Or if we're setting up one of those journal entries that is a recurring one, I can select that template type, and you'll see some of the options like we could previously when creating recurring journal entries. We're going to be able to set the frequency as far as how often it posts. We'll be able to denote a start date for that journal entry. We can end it after a specific date or after a certain number of occurrences. And then we can choose to automatically post that to the GL, or we can put that in a pending status where we can review it and then post it at that point in time. So again, just to recap those recurring journal entries now in this template section. This is going to be a manual one though. So I'll come in and I'll just set some of these presets here. We'll do a pretty easy example. We'll say this is maybe just a cash transfer that we're doing at the end of the month. I'll do my description for both of these line items. And we'll come over to the debit and credit section and we'll add some amounts. Now, we can't leave these fields set to 0. We do have to enter at least a $1 amount just to have something listed. We can always update it when we create the journal entry. Now, I'll save my template here. Let me go ahead and update my name. It already exists. We'll add the template. It'll be added to the list. I can now close this window out and we'll go back into the Add Journal Entry section. Now that we're in here, we'll click on the Templates tab or button on the right-hand side, and you'll see all of the manual templates that you've created for the property. I can come in here, select that template that I just created. When I apply the template, it's going to pull in all of the presets. I can now come in here and make any last minute adjustments. I can update the amounts, things like that, and we'll be able to post the journal entry just like we normally would. Now, within the journal entry creation, the only other thing that's changed is the line item defaults. Again, just like we saw with purchase orders and invoices, we're able to flag by department using custom tags or mark these transactions as confidential. Maybe it's a salaries journal entry that we're adding at the end of the month, things like that. We can flag those as confidential, and only certain users are going to be able to see them. Now, as far as the templates go, are there any questions related to the journal entry templates before I move on to the last and final thing that we're going to be talking about, which is restricting posting to GL accounts? If you do have any questions, please feel free to chat me those questions. You can also click your hand and I can unmute you as well. Alrighty, I don't see anything coming up here on my end, so we'll talk about the last thing for today, which was going to be restricting posting to GL accounts. Now, in the past, we've had requests come in for the ability to hide specific accounts from users within Entrata, and on Thursday, we're going to be releasing that functionality to you so that you can mark certain GL accounts as restricted. Now, what we'll have to do, it'll be a two-step process here. We're going to be able to go in and flag the account as restricted. We'll also have to go in and update the permissions for those users that will want to be able to have access to those specific accounts. So let's do the first kind of part in that process, the first step, and that's going to be restricting the accounts. So under Setup Company and Financial, I'm going to go to my general ledger and I'm going to pull up that GL tree. I'll pull up the master, and in this section is where we'll be able to flag those accounts as restricted. Now I can do it individually by account if I'd like to. I can come in here, select any account, and on the right hand side we're going to see two new settings listed where I can restrict posting to that account within the AP system, so under the purchase orders or invoices, or I can also restrict posting in the journal entry section here as well. We'll set those to yes if we want to, click save, and that account is going to be flagged as restricted. I can also do this in bulk if I want to by coming up to bulk edit accounts and just switching those flags here, restricting AP or restricting journal entry, all within this section. Now, once the account itself is restricted, we'll have to update the permissions for those users. So we'll want to go into setup users and groups, and in that section we'll want to open up either the user or the group itself, and under the permissions tab we want to make sure that we're updating the permissions to allow those users to see those specific accounts and post to them. Now under the accounting section I can open up the PO section, and you'll notice here we'll have the permission to allow posting to restricted GL accounts. We can enable that and allow access to it. We'll have to update under the invoices section as well. There'll be a separate permission there, and then we'll have to do it within journal entries also so that they're able to post to restricted GL accounts in that section. So again, two-step process. We'll have to flag the account as restricted, and then we'll have to come in here and update the user or group permissions so that they can access those accounts. But with that release on March 17th, that functionality will be available to you. So just keep that in mind. Just to kind of recap then, we talked a little bit about the vendor profile and some of the changes that are coming to that, specifically with the legal entity setup and the compliance section and rule sets. There were also some changes to the purchase order creation, invoice creation, and journal entry creation sections, primarily with templates there in that journal entry section. And then we're going to be releasing the functionality to restrict specific GL accounts. I do appreciate everybody jumping on this morning. if you guys would like a copy of the recording, I can make that available to you guys. I'll send a link out to everybody where you'll be able to access the recording itself. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to let me know. I'll stick around for another minute or two, but if you don't have any additional questions, please feel free to jump on. Again, I do appreciate everybody jumping on today. Alrighty, hey Holly, so I can show you that. Let me pull up the account here. So we'll go to Setup Company, and under Financial, I'm going to pull up my bank account. That needs to be enabled. As far as the memo line itself, it needs to be enabled with the layout that's tied to that respective bank account. So in this section here, all I got to do now is, if I have access to it, I can find the account that I want to update, and you're going to see a little button here on the right hand side. That's going to allow you to update the actual check layout itself. Now, I can come in here and I can edit the check layout. If I edit that layout, you'll be able to see the memo line, check memo, is now an option within that section. So I can enable it, and I'll be able to see that when I'm printing these checks out. Just keep that in mind. If you want to enable it, you do have to have access to the Setup Company Financial section in order to be able to make that change. Now, Teresa, I do see your question came in concerning the guide with this information. That guide is available to you under the help and support section. That guide will have those updates added to it as well. And you should already see a lot of that information within the guide itself. We updated the guide for the rapid release, and it should be updated for the standard release also. So you'll see it. Hey, Holly.
Hey, how do I specify what prints in the memo section on the check?
So when you actually go to process a payment, you'll be able to type in text in that section. It's a new field.
It's at the time of
creating the check.
So it's when you're creating the check or finalizing the payment?
Finalizing the payment.
Okay, so when I go into finalizing the payment, can you see my screen right now?
I actually can't, no.
Okay.
I can't.
Because that's where I'm at. I'm at finalize payments.
Okay.
But I wonder, will it be clear? Like, will it say memo?
Yeah, it'll say memo, and it'll have a little input text field that you can edit out.
Oh, okay. Kind of like the amount to pay?
Yes, kind of like that.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
All right. Yeah, it seems like in past programs I've used, they've allowed you to, when you're entering the invoice, to specify what you want to go in the memo section, and then there's a feature in the program that says memo is enabled, so that every time, you don't have to go in every time at the time of finalized payments and put that in.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
No, I know what you mean, and I've actually had that question come up before because a lot of the times our users will put it in that note section in the invoice. I'm sure you've probably done that before.
Right.
Thinking it might work the same, and it doesn't transfer over to the check.
And it doesn't transfer.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we added the ability to edit that out if you have it enabled, so that you can type in the text that you'd like. That's kind of how we made up for that.
Oh wait, say that again. The last part.
So instead of transferring whatever you add at the time of the invoice creation, we allow you to edit that field out so that you can add whatever text you want in that section. But it is when you finalize the payment.
Oh, so you're saying when you finalize the payment, whatever's in that note section is going to go in the memo section anyways?
No, it's not. I was just kind of going back to your question where it doesn't do that. And to kind of make up for that, what we allow you to do now is we allow you to enter in the text yourself at the time that you finalize.
Yeah, at least it. Right. So it's not quite there as far as, automatically putting it on the check.
Correct.
But for right now, at least it'll give us the ability to type it in the memo section.
That is correct.
Is what you're saying. Do you think down the road that feature could be enabled?
You know, you're not the first person to ask as far as
Oh,
that
I'm
feature.
sure a ton of people
and
ask
so,
you that.
And
Yeah.
so I hope so. I'm hoping so.
Okay.
I don't have
Yeah.
a specific timeline, but I think I've heard it enough times that I think it's starting to build some traction, and we can definitely, you know, at a later point in time, I see that happening.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take what I can get now.
All right.
Okay, thank you so much.
You have a good one.
Good presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Lisa, are you there?
Yeah.
Hey, I just unmuted you. Now I see your question. It came in concerning the asset log.
Yeah.
Now, do you guys not currently use? You don't have asset tracking enabled?
We don't. I think it's rolling out as part of that on the 17th.
Right. So it's existing functionality within the system. But as far as like keeping the log, are you talking about being able to see the assets within like the vendors or the purchase order section?
Correct. Like just as we create it or do the PO, that you can actually choose the asset itself. Like you have to have the catalog.
Yeah, you have to have the catalog enabled in order to be able to see those. That needs to be on in order to be able to select from that list, unfortunately.
Okay.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Alrighty, Lisa. Hey, thanks for jumping on. You're the last person on, so I hope you have a good day.
You as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.